Presiding Officer, yesterday the damning Audit Scotland report was published into this SNP government's failure to build 2 lifeline ferries. Kate Forbes was put forward to respond in this chamber and to the media, but couldn't say who made the key decision to sign off this disastrous contract. So, First Minister, can you give a straight answer where your Finance Secretary could not? Which minister gave the green light for these ferry contracts against expert advice?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, to turn to the substance of the question, before I come directly to that question, let me say very candidly, the problems with the procurement, or rather the construction, because it's not the procurement, the construction of these ferries, which resulted in delay, cost overruns and an impact, a very negative impact on island communities, is far from satisfactory, and I think that is putting it mildly. The report that was published by Audit Scotland yesterday is entirely fair and justified. There are a number of complexities, but these are public contracts, and therefore, of course, the buck stops with the Scottish Government. Pre-2019, these were issues around the quality of work and progress of work when the yard was in private ownership. Of course, since the nationalisation of the yard at the end of 2019, further problems have been identified, the cabling problem being the most significant. And of course, there was additional delay because of COVID. But we remain focused on the delivery of the ferries. And of course, the actions that the Scottish Government have taken have helped to secure jobs, the last remaining commercial shipbuilder on the Clyde, and I think that is important. Turning to the specific question briefly, Presiding Officer, who was Transport Minister at the time in question is of course a matter of public record. That was Derek MacKay. But of course, this is a government, and this may be alien to the Conservatives, I understand, but this is a government that operates by collective responsibility. And ultimately, as with any decisions, whether I am personally involved in them or not, responsibility stops with me. And in terms of the documents around that particular decision, many of these documents have been in the public domain for some time. They clearly narrate the issues with the lack of a full refund guarantee, but they also clearly narrate the mitigations that were put in place to reduce that risk. Now, these are documents that are in the public domain and available for anybody to review.
Douglas Ross.
The Finance Secretary couldn't tell this Parliament or the media asking yesterday who was to blame, but 24 hours later, the SNP's spin machine has spun into action, and it's the fault of the disgraced ex-Finance Minister. So let me get this absolutely straight. The First Minister is claiming she had no involvement. The Audit Scotland report confirms that SNP ministers were aware of the huge risk with this project, but carried on regardless. The government she leads, willingly decided to charge ahead against expert advice. The First Minister is now trying to blame Derek MacKay, and it all just seems very convenient that the person getting the blame is no longer here. It was the First Minister's government, her cabinet, her decision. So let me ask again. While she is saying the Transport Minister took the decision, what input to that decision did the First Minister have through the government she leads?
First Minister.
I'm genuinely not sure if Douglas Ross listened to a single word that I said. It was him who asked who the individual minister was. I did not volunteer that information. It is a matter of public record who the Transport Minister was at the time of that decision. It is a matter of public record that that was Derek MacKay. But here's the bit, of course, that I know doesn't suit the script that Douglas Ross prepared before he came into the chamber, but here's what I went on to say, and I'm going to repeat it again just to be absolutely clear. This is a government that operates by collective responsibility, and I am responsible ultimately for all decisions that the government takes. The buck stops with me. I have never tried to shy away from that on any issue. I know that's not how things are done in the Conservative government at Westminster, but that is how things are done here. So perhaps Douglas Ross might want to reflect before his next question on what I'm actually saying here. I am ultimately responsible for all decisions of the Scottish Government. That's why, of course, I am standing here asking the questions. But on the substance of this issue. And as I said, the documents are available in the public domain, and the issues around, in particular, because this was a concern that CMAL had expressed about the lack of a full refund guarantee. Those concerns are set out in these documents, but so too are the actions that were taken to mitigate these risks. And of course, government then comes to a decision on the balance of risk. And of course, the documents express the view that the current deal that has been negotiated with FML is the best deal that can be achieved given the financial restrictions the yard is operating under. So there were 3 key changes made, and actually this is all set out in the Audit Scotland report: an increase in the final payment so that more money was being withheld, that CMAL would take ownership of all equipment, machinery, materials as they arrived at the shipyard, and FML would require all major suppliers to offer a full refund guarantee. These are the changes that reduced the risk and of course underpinned the decision that the government arrived at. But I come back to the central point here. I am not defending the cost overruns, the delay around the construction of these ferries. It is completely unacceptable. But at all points, the motivation of this government has been to save jobs, save the shipyard and make sure that these ferries, albeit late, and that is a matter of deep regret, can be delivered. And that's what we continue to focus on.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister says she takes ultimate responsibility, then throws an ex-minister, a disgraced SNP ex-minister, under the bus. So if we are looking at ultimate responsibility from the First Minister, can she tell us why a key safeguard was removed that could have saved Scottish taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds? Can she tell us, with her ultimate responsibility, why they started building the ferries when they didn't even have a design agreed? With her ultimate responsibility, can she tell us why Ferguson Marine were given the contract in the first place? And with her ultimate responsibility, can she tell us why there is not going to be a public inquiry into this whole scandal? Because we need this public inquiry, because Audit Scotland tried to get answers, but they couldn't. They said, and I quote, "There is no documented evidence to confirm why Scottish Government ministers were willing to accept the risk of awarding a contract to Ferguson Marine despite CMAL's concerns. We consider that there should have been a proper record of this important decision." First Minister, this is one of the most reckless decisions ever taken by a Scottish Government so far, costing £250 million of taxpayers' money. First Minister, why can't the body in Scotland charged with scrutinising public spending get a shred of evidence to justify your government's decision?
First Minister.
Who had read Audit Scotland's report could reach that particular conclusion, but I'll come back to that. But can I say this first of all? If Douglas Ross thinks it is unimportant who the individual minister was, and that, as I agree with, the buck stops with me, why was his first question asking me who the individual minister was? Clearly, he must have thought that was important. I was not intending to come here and do anything other than accept full responsibility. Coming on to the questions, and let me answer them one by one. So, on the decision to proceed and the lack of the full builder's refund guarantee, that's what I've already run through. That decision was clearly taken on the balance of risk. CMAL had concerns about that, but a range of actions had been taken, and I set out exactly what those actions were to mitigate those risks. And the conclusion, and this is in documentation that is publicly available, that the deal negotiated was the best one that could have been achieved in those circumstances. Now, the second question I think that Douglas Ross asked me was why was the contract awarded to FML when it was the most expensive? Again, that question is actually answered in the Audit Scotland report. The review, of course, found that it was the most expensive. I think, if memory serves me correctly, that was known at the time. But CMAL also assessed the bid as being of the highest quality. So overall, it achieved the highest combined cost and quality score of the 7 bids. That was the decision taken at the time. And of course, ministers are not involved in procurement decisions. And lastly, Presiding Officer, on the question of a public inquiry, we of course have had a parliamentary committee look into this issue. We've now had a major Audit Scotland review, but as Audit Scotland itself recommends at page 7, I think, on completion of the vessels, there should be a formal review of what went wrong with a view to learning lessons. So the Scottish Government will consider what form that further review should take. We will consider that carefully and, of course, we will report to Parliament in due course.
Douglas Ross.
It's ridiculous. We are fortunate in Scotland to have two governments, and there's only one of them currently building ships in Scotland that actually sail. And that is because of this First Minister's record in government. So let's look again. Ferguson Marine was the most expensive bidder, yet, as the First Minister has just said, was chosen on the basis of quality. Chosen on the basis of quality when ferries are 2.5 times over budget. Hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has already been wasted. There is a 5-year delay at least, and there's still 175 faults with the ferries that are still being built. This is one of the worst public spending disasters since devolution. And who messed up? Who knows in SNP seeks at Scotland? Because all the evidence is gone. Audit Scotland couldn't get to the bottom of a number of points. The only scraps of paper we have left about this disastrous decision are the old SNP press releases that claimed they were saving Scottish shipbuilding. So, First Minister, can I ask, when you visited the ferries in 2016, were the painted-on windows not a sign that your decision was an absolute shocker?
First Minister.
Well, I think what Douglas Ross has demonstrated there is that he has not spent much time actually reading the hundreds of pages of documents that are in the public domain. There is one issue where Audit Scotland refers to a lack of documentation. I think that is a matter that the Government needs to reflect on seriously and will. But there are hundreds of pages of documents. I've referred to many of them already, and they would bear some attention, I think, from Douglas Ross. I said candidly at the outset, I think this is a deeply regrettable situation. At the time I visited the yard, of course, it was in private ownership. Assurances were given there about the completion of work, and the problems that have led to cost overruns, delays and, worst of all, a negative impact on our island communities is deeply regrettable. At every step, the motivation of the Government has been to secure employment, to secure the shipyard and to get these ferries completed, and that is what we will continue to focus on. We will learn the lessons in the Audit Scotland report. We will make sure that all of the recommendations in it are taken forward. But Douglas Ross may think it is unimportant to have saved 300 jobs and a shipyard. I actually think these things matter, and that is why we will now focus on making sure that that yard has a positive future.
Question number 2.